2951 Abundant Patricide. Why, won't you die? As the heavenly chain swayed and groaned beneath him, Mordred pushed forward and drove his sword into Astarion's chest. The sharp blade pierced the skin and the muscle, sliding between the Dreamspawn's ribs to cut open his heart and sever his spine. It escaped in a torrent of blood from his back, glistening like a scarlet monument to the vicious act of murder. Astarion simply smiled, grabbing Mordred's wrist and bringing his own sword down. His sword, with a black hilt and a scarlet blade, was the embodiment of Morgan of Valor. Mordred's stubborn sister had walked such a long and thorny path to free herself from the fate of becoming a blade that someone else wielded, and yet here she was, reduced to being an obedient weapon nevertheless. And such a lethal weapon, as well. Snarling, Mordred wrenched his wrist free of Astarion's hold and staggered back, avoiding the eerily sharp blade of his sword by a hair's breadth. That blade was sharp enough to cut the world itself, so it made short work of his enchanted armor. Already, Mordred was covered in shallow wounds, his black armor shredded and battered. Astarion, meanwhile, just a few moments after Mordred's sword was torn from his chest, followed by a gushing stream of blood, his body seemed as good as new. The ghastly wound in his chest was gone, just as the other wounds Mordred had dealt him. Even his clothes seemed whole once more, pristine and unblemished. The Dreamspawn took a step forward, a cold glint appearing in his golden eyes. Why do you insist on continuing this senseless game, boy? Come, now, it's long overdue for you to see reason. As his golden eyes reflected in Mordred's own, Mordred grimaced and grabbed his head briefly, groaning. Wouldn't you like to know? All around them, the battle for the Ebony Tower was raging on. The 7 reflections were still drowning in the flood of human soldiers. The champions of the Hunger Domain were still advancing across the celestial chains. Both above and below them, a myriad of winged abominations were engaged in ferocious fight. But the cadence of the battle was changing now. The vessels of Mordred that had attacked the Night Garden were all but wiped out, which allowed the Titanic ship to take a more active role in the siege of the Ebony Island. The 2 saints of the White Feather clan had joined the battle for the sky below, leading their warriors into a lethal clash against the detestable vessels that defended it, and now, the forces of the Hunger Domain were close to breaking through. Seishan was getting closer to the shores of the Ebony Island, growing stronger and stronger as more blood was spilled around her. Things were not looking good for Mordred, especially because his adversary refused to die. As a supreme titan, Mordred was stronger than Astarion. More than that, he was far more skilled a warrior, and his devious cunning was beyond comparison. However, the Dreamspawn encompassed all of humanity within his domain, and so, all of humanity added weight to his will. So, existence itself was bending to help Astarion win while working against Mordred at the same time. It was as if he was fighting on the bottom of the ocean, the great weight of dark water pressing him down. His adversary, on the contrary, was supported and protected by the cold currents. And yet, despite that, Mordred had prevailed in the vicious exchanges with Astarion over and over again. He had avoided the fatal edge of Morgan's transcendent form and pierced Astarion's body. He severed Astarion's limbs, cut off his head, bled him until the entire surface of the heavenly chain was slick with blood, split him in 2, over and over again. Even as his armor became battered and torn and dozens of shallow wounds littered his original vessel, the vessel the nightmare spell had granted him after the second nightmare, at least, to replace the one destroyed by the Knights of Valor. Mordred continued to fight, dealing deadly wounds to the Dreamspawn. It was partially due to his own strength and skill, and partially due to the fact that one of his reflections was still wearing the image of Cassia, and could therefore glimpse a few moments into the future. Thanks to that, Mordred was managing to hold Astarion back despite the dire gap in the weight of their wills. It was all useless, though, because the Dreamspawn could not be destroyed. His body was merely a manifestation of an idea, after all, so for as long as the idea of him still existed, he could manifest himself anew as many times as he wanted. There were probably some conditions involved, such as a steep price paid in soul essence, but since Astarion now commanded all of humanity, his essence was endless. And so, breathing heavily, Mordred commanded his sword to extend into a spear and pointed it at Astarion, forcing a smile onto his pale lips. Stop trying to poison my mind, old man. It won't work. Taking another step forward and raising his sword, Astarion responded to his smile with his own. Oh, I think it is working just fine. Mordred did not show it, but he had to agree. The longer they fought, the deeper Astarion's claws pierced his mind. He could already feel a peculiar, irrational impulse to surrender to despair and abandon all caution, challenging the dream spawn to a soul duel, which was indeed a good option now that he thought about it. No, you fool, Mordred shook his head, as if hoping to get rid of the thoughts instilled into him. Challenging Astarion to a soul duel was a sure way to die, or worse still, become a thrall. After all, Mordred would be completely vulnerable if he invaded the Dreamspawn's vast, sinister soul, and while he would be able to mirror Astarion's aspect there, he would not get the benefit of ruling the Hunger Domain. More than that, even if Mordred did win and destroy Astarion's soul, gaining control of his body in the process, what was the point of that? The idea of the Dreamspawn would still be intact, which meant that Astarion would simply manifest a new body and a new soul for himself. That was something that Mordred found more and more difficult to remember. Instead of answering Astarion, he simply thrust his spear forward, throwing himself into the fight once more. Indeed, why was Mordred persisting in such a senseless affair? Defending the Ebony Island, facing the Dreamspawn in battle. Why, it was because Mordred had a plan, naturally. It was a desperate plan, no doubt, a gamble, even, one where he had to put everything, including his life, on the line. However, he simply saw no other way to emerge victorious in the war against the Dreamspawn. Even if Mordred retreated today and hid himself in the Hollow Mountains, launching raids on the territories of the Hunger Domain from the safety of their endless mists, he would be merely prolonging his death. Astarion was simply too powerful and too diabolical, and having already conquered the world, he was not going to be defeated in the future. The only chance to stop him was now. So, Mordred had set his last, desperate plan into motion, without letting Astarion read it in his thoughts. Hiding something from the Dreamspawn was not an easy matter, but because of how vast and fragmented Mordred's mind was, he could barely manage. All he had to do was concentrate on the carnage of battle, on the perspectives of his innumerable vessels, all drowning in a harrowing sea of violence, and on the pain of being cut in. Torn apart 100 times every moment. For now, at least, Astarion did not seem aware of what Mordred was prepared to do. I think this is enough, don't you? The Dreamspawn's voice was laced with a hint of mockery. As Mordred attempted to erase the relaxed smile from his face with the tip of a spear, Astarion's gaze suddenly turned cold and ruthless. Lunging forward with startling speed, he grabbed the shaft of the spear and easily shattered it between his fingers. As the enchanted weapon disintegrated in a rain of sparks, he was already beside Mordred. His palm collided with the black metal of Mordred's breastplate, and an awful shockwave rattled the world. Mordred was sent flying hundreds of meters back, a fountain of blood escaping from his mouth. Bouncing off the bloodied surface of the heavenly chain, he rolled 100 meters more and finally came to a halt, trying to rise to his feet weakly. In the next moment, though, he reeled back and cursed. Astarion was already beside him, delivering a lethal slash with the vermilion blade of his sword. Even though Mordred skirted, the sharp edge still caught him across the chest, easily slicing through the bent breastplate and leaving a deep wound. Blood flowed down Mordred's body. And, unlike Astarion, he couldn't simply manifest himself a new one. Even if he did have a myriad of spare bodies to choose from. A flurry of destructive blows descended upon Mordred, making the heavenly chain rattle and groan. Astarion seemed to be everywhere, all at once, his dire strength making both the sky above and the sky below shake. Mordred suppressed a groan. In the end, he escaped the relentless assault in one piece, even if just barely. Astarion, meanwhile, seemed calm and collected. He had not even broken a sweat. Mordred smiled darkly. Ah, yes, it is indeed enough. His smile widened a little, then dimmed, replaced by a somber expression. Thank you for entertaining me for a short while. But now, if you don't mind, I must depart. Astarion was already upon him, a ruthless glint igniting in his golden eyes. But I do mind. The scarlet blade of his sentient sword fell down with impossible speed, cutting all ways of escape. More blood spilled on the bloodied surface of the celestial chain. 2952 all or nothing. There was a thunderclap and a deafening roar. Cassie felt the Ebony Island shudder as two supremes clashed on one of the heavenly chains. The forces unleashed by their harrowing battle were fearsome enough to make an entire realm quake. The chain isles were all connected to each other. So, the tremors running through the Ebony Island spread through the 7 celestial chains to the neighboring islands, and from them to all the rest. The battle between Mordred and Astarion could be felt not only here, but even all the way in the sanctuary of Noctis. All the flying isles were swaying up and down as the chain holding them up drew taut. The sky below was full of violence, and blood was raining from the sky above. The 6 remaining siege armies were pushing their way across the abyss, and by now, it seemed that an invasion of the Ebony Island was inevitable. On its shores, those of Mordred's vessels who were not sending annihilating volleys of projectiles into the sky were already preparing for a furious melee. It seemed like the King of Nothing was prepared to defend his stronghold to the last drop of blood. Cassie felt uneasy. In fact, she felt desperate. But still, all she could do was pour her essence into the runic circle to control the defensive array of the Ebony Island, which was slowly failing. The cadence of the battle was growing more frenetic. Far away, the Night Garden had changed course and was now moving directly toward the last stronghold of the King of Nothing. The Ivory Island, as well, was descending from the sky, moving through the mayhem of the terrifying aerial battle between the echoes and nightmare creatures like a pristine white mountain. It was aiming for its blackened facsimile, as well. The 7 reflections had not been shattered yet, but they were surrounded on all sides, besieged by transcendent champions and ascended veterans alike. Mordred, the array is not going to hold much longer. The closest vessel to Cassie was a giant, eerily beautiful crystalline insect, but it could hear, as well. So, it made no difference if she talked to Mordred's original body or this grotesque creature. The glass abomination turned its transparent head, its mandibles moving to produce a melodious ringing sound. Cassie did not know what it meant. Then, several more monsters of the hive appeared from the mass of abominable vessels, drawing closer to the Ebony Tower. Most of those vessels that originated in the glass hell were moving away from the shores of the island, in fact. What is he planning? No matter how Cassie looked at the battle, she did not see a way for the mirror domain to win. If Astarion himself could be removed from the battlefield, maybe, but if that was possible, there would have been no need to fight this battle at all. She gritted her teeth and moved aside, evading a great arrow sent from one of the heavenly chains by a transcendent hand. There was a flash, and the arrow shattered against the black of the Ebony Tower. It seemed that Astarion harbored an obsessive desire to remove her from the board, still. The bloody cuts left on Cassie's body by shrapnel ached. The battle raged on, growing more and more ferocious with each minute. Until, eventually, its balance was finally broken. Mordred had managed to hold Astarion back, but by shifting his focus to the direct clash of wills and a violent exchange of blows with the Dreamspawn, he allowed the Dreamspawn's thralls to push his countless vessels too far back. Seishan was the first one to step on the black obsidian of the Ebony Island, her monstrous figure awash in blood. In fact, she had to advance across a carpet of ravaged corpses first before finally having a chance to put her foot on bloodied stone. And once the first of the assault forces reached the shore of the adversary's stronghold, it was as if a destructive chain reaction spread among its defenders. The monstrous vessels that had been waiting on the island rushed forward to push the invaders back onto the heavenly chain, or into the black abyss below, but it was already too late. Seishan's soldiers advanced along the edges of the Ebony Island, attacking the vessels defending the other heavenly chains from the rear. Mordred's defenses crumbled. Almost at the same time, the barrier of vessels protecting his stronghold from below was breached, as well. The forces of humanity sent into the sky below climbed to the surface of the Ebony Island, led by the warriors of the White Feather clan. The Ivory Tower had already crossed the tear by then, and a wave of invaders jumped from its shores to the black expanse of ancient obsidian. The Night Garden was drawing near. Countless abominable vessels scattered across the wide expanse of Mordred's last stronghold rushed forward to meet the invaders with lethal fury, and the Ebony Island was suddenly drowned in chaos and slaughter. Cassie felt nauseated, feeling too many of her marks being destroyed or suffering terrible wounds. For now, the defenders were still keeping the adversary back from reaching the Ebony Tower, but how long would it last? Countless runes carved into the surface of the ancient obsidian were destroyed now, and the runic array lost its power. Cassie took a hesitant step forward, nervously grasping the hilt of her dagger. "I wouldn't recommend that." Mordred's hoarse voice made her flinch. Turning, she sensed his presence behind her. She could not see what he looked like at the moment, but the heavy smell of blood told its own story. It seemed that Mordred had not escaped unscathed from the battle against Astarion. In fact, it was a miracle that he managed to escape at all. How had he slipped away from the Dreamspawn in the middle of a furious duel? And for what reason? Now that no one was holding back Astarion, he would arrive at the shores of the Ebony Island before too long, as well. Why is that? Cassie did not see a clear path to victory, but she knew that rain and smile of heaven were behind her, in the Ebony Tower. So, she had to do everything in her power to prevent the enemy from reaching its gates. Why would Mordred prevent her from joining The Fray? He seemed to have smiled, then said in a raspy tone. "It's just that, If I were you, Song of the Fallen, I would retreat inside the Ebony Tower as soon as I could. If I wanted to have a chance to survive, that is. Cassie felt a cold shiver running down her spine, her intuition suddenly warning her to be wary of him, her one and only remaining ally. Why? Mordred remained silent for a few seconds, then laughed darkly. Because I am about to do something reckless. And I'll need to buy myself a bit of time before that. She sensed him approaching, her nostrils assaulted by the stench of blood. Then, he shoved her back, toward the gates of the Ebony Tower. Go, I still have a use for you, so I'm inclined to keep you alive, for now. At that moment, she sensed something else. The reflections appearing silently from the slaughter, moving toward the Ebony Tower as well. Why would Mordred not only retreat himself, but also recall his reflections? What was that madman trying to do? She was suddenly thrown to the ground, the entire Ebony Island quaking, far more violently than ever before. Several seconds in the past, or rather, in the present, Cassie turned and faced the direction where the masts of the Night Garden now obscured the sky. The Titanic ship collided with the Ebony Island, using its great mast to arrest its momentum. The next moment, countless awakened poured from its decks onto the obsidian shore. Cassie remained motionless for a few seconds, then took a step back and turned around. She followed the reflections toward the gates of the Ebony Tower. And as she did, a swarm of crystalline abominations of the glass hell rushed forward from beneath the dark fabric that had been hiding them and scurried up the walls of the ancient tower, covering them like a layer of glass. Turning the entire Ebony Tower into a giant mirror. What reflected in that mirror was not the harrowing sight of the cataclysmic battle, however. It was an endless expanse of swirling white mist. And as Mordred smiled darkly and stepped back, limping, the great mirror burst open, an unstoppable flood of nothingness escaping from its shattered depths.